Hey guys, what's cracking? Coming at you with a deck update. So recently on the channel, I did a series of deck profiles for the 6 Destined ones, in which I outlined the card choices and overall strategy for each of those new boss units. And with the most recent set DZ-BT05 Omniscient Awakening having been fully revealed, we not only got the release of the final Destined 1 Odium, but also brand new support for the other 5 Destined ones that were released in the set prior. So I thought it prudent to give a quick deck update for each of those 5 Destined ones and take a look at how they may have changed after the most recent set support. Note, however, that this series is meant to be a companion series to my deck profiles, so unlike those, I won't be going into super major detail on the deck fundamentals and card choices. Instead, I'll keep it brief and take a look at the overview of the deck, discuss the new cards it got, show off the new deck list with the added support, and then top things off with a look at its overall stats. That last bit was something I recently implemented starting with Odium's deck profile, so I figured it'd be nice to give the other 5 Destined ones the same treatment. Now, first on the list we have Impauldio, the fastest in the universe, the first to get its support in set 5 revealed, and coincidentally the first to also get a Destined 1 deck profile on my channel. How about that? Coincidence do happen. Before we begin, however, I want to give a quick shout out to my channel members, Noir Helios, The Maz, Dread Dreamer, and finally Muffin Killer. Thank you guys so much for the support, it helps a ton. And with that said, let's get right into the deck update. I hope you enjoy. So the Destined 1 of Exceedance Impauldio was first released in DZ-BT04, and with it came the brand new mechanic of the Automod Gauge, a new playstyle in which whenever you take a damage, you're able to put a card from your drop zone into the gauge and thus grant your Vanguard a defensive power-up bonus during the opponent's turn. This is a totally one-of-a-kind gimmick, one that no other deck has, and is somewhat reminiscent of the Vanguard Zero power-ups that we got with that mobile game. Rest in peace, Vanguard Zero, you will be missed. Now, with this also comes a ramp-based game plan, which is the overall winning image of Impauldio, as the later the game goes on, the more Automod Gauge that you can ramp up, and with it comes an incremental increase in the overall power up that you grant to your front row units via Impauldio's first skill, as well as turning on various effects for your rearguards online based on the number of Automod Gauge that you have accumulated over the course of the game. Thus, not only is it a ramp deck, but it also leans very heavily into the late game. The more powerful it gets is based on how long it's been able to accumulate said gauges. Now, taking a look at the new support cards that we got, we see a pretty interesting direction for Impauldio, as rather than increase the power or the ability to ramp gauges, we actually see a little bit more versatility and recoverability, and maybe even a bit of consistency. The main claim to fame for Impauldio is in the form of Headway Router Dragon, the new triple rare. When it's placed on the rear circle, if you have an Automod Gauge, you can Energy Blast 3 to look at the top 5 cards of the deck and choose a card with a different card name from this unit, and grade less than or equal to your Vanguard from among them. You call to the rear circle and then shuffle the deck. It also has a secondary skill where when it boosts, if you have 5 or more Automod Gauge, you can Soul Blast to give this unit an extra 5k until end of that battle. So Headway Router is absolutely fantastic, as it provides not only more digging and searchability to the deck, but it is also a fantastic way of using your energy, as the deck only had generics to use energy on. It actually didn't receive an energy blaster in its initial wave of dedicated support. Thus, Headway Router is almost certainly going to be a staple in this deck. Another support card that it got was Roving Probe. Now, Roving Probe comes with it some pretty cool versatility elements, and another way to use the Automod Gauge in a way we haven't seen before. Its first skill states auto on the drop. When this card is chosen by the original act effect of your grade 3 or greater Vanguard than Impauldio in its card name, choose one of your units and it gets power plus 10,000 until end of turn. The secondary skill states also in the drop. When it's chosen by the original auto effect of your system code X-ceed, you can soul charge and energy charge 1. So this doesn't just bring resources to the table, but also even more power. But what's interesting about Roving Probe is that it only has effects when it's chosen by other effects, meaning that when it's just on the field, it is effectively a vanilla. This is where it gets to be kind of a controversial card, because on one end, the benefits it provides are pretty solid overall, and it's very free resource and power. However, because it's only useful in the drop zone and only under the certain conditions of being chosen by particular other cards, in a lot of cases, it's effectively a dead card, something they'll just want to guard with it. You wouldn't even want it on the field because it's not a good attacker, and there are much better things that you want on the field than this card. Thus, it's a bit of a controversial card, and one that, while I think is a pretty good option for the deck, it's not as necessary. Furthermore, Impauldio actually does benefit pretty well from one of the new triple rares that we get for Brandgate, which is Waving Congregate Glitch Epicenter. So Waving Congregate is what you would call a cycle card for set 5. That is to say that it is an archetypal type of card that each nation shares, and this one states, continuous, if your G-zone has no cards, this unit gets all the following. Thus, you can't use it in a stride deck set. After the hand, if you have a grade Grade 3 or greater Vanguard. Cost, discard this card and put a total of 2 cards from your soul or drop that were in the right deck face up into the right deck. And look at the top 7 cards of the deck. Choose up to 1 Grade 3 or greater card with a different card name from your Vanguard from among them, reveal it and put it in your hand, and shuffle the deck. If you did not reveal a card, put this card into your hand. Secondly, auto. When this unit is put on Guardian Circle, if your order zone or drop has a set order, this unit gets plus 5k shield until end of that battle. If your opponent's G zone has a card, however, cost, bind a grade 3 or greater card from your soul or drop, and this unit gets shield plus 10,000 until end of that battle. Effectively, this is a consistency card that also adds even more shield, which is right up Impauldio's alley, as it is inherently a very defensive playstyle in nature, thanks to the use of the system code XYZ to get defensive power-ups. In addition to that, this card also lets you search for grade 3 or greater cards, as long as it's not Impauldio itself, because it has to be a different card name. This is very important because perhaps the most key support card in Impauldio, even to this day, is Vinstar, which is a grade 3 rear card that allows you the ability to conduct additional drive checks and also get a bit more power. The drive checks not just give you more card advantage, but even more pressure, and the deck is very reliant on that pressure, thus it is very reliant on Vinstar by transitive property, and this is a way of searching Vinstar pretty reliably, all things considered. Not as reliably as Pansmermia, of course, but the upside this has over Pansmermia is that it doesn't cost any counter or energy blast, and it doesn't need you to be on Persona Ride turn. You can do this as soon as turn 3. So this is a very versatile support card, and one that I can imagine that a lot of decks would run, and I'd say it's a fantastic option. So now that we've gone over the support cards that Impauldio got in set 5, let's take a look at the updated deck list. Now, as you see, you have a lot of the usual suspects, and of the Destined ones, Impauldio got one of the lighter touches in terms of changes, but it's still very significant. We can see right away that we have 4 of Headway Router, because this Energy Blast skill is insanely strong, giving you supreme level of consistency and also recoverability in case you have to strike back from a board wipe. And that Soul Blast to get 5k, while it's not that necessary, is still a neat benefit because Soul is fairly free in this deck and you can use it for whatever you want. It's very much a use more kind of resource. It's not a choke point whatsoever. In addition to that, we aren't using any of the other support cards, of course, but we do have the inclusion of the Fluctuate Buster Barrage from last time, which utilizes more defensive gimmicks in the form of a Blitz order. Now, this does actually conflict a little bit with the Elementary Sanctitude, so do be careful about having both these in hand, as you can only use one that turn, but because it can use grade 2 or greater cards for your drop of different card names to the Guardian Circle and give 10k shield, you're looking at a pretty high maximum of 40k shield as long as the cards that you chose were Nebula Invoke Dragon and Elbard X-striker, which is a 20k shield, a 10k shield respectively, and then 10k defensive from this grade 2 for that battle. So it's a very powerful shield card, of course, but it's not a unit, so it can break in that department, and also it is reliant on having particular cards in the drop zone to use. So it is a bit of a debatable card that I'm trying out, but I found it to be very clutch at times when going against the very big, heavy pushers of the format. And a lot of the top decks like Varga Dragres, Equilibra, and still, even to this day, Shiranui, believe it or not, they swing with very high numbers. So this can mean the difference between life or death, quite honestly. So going over the strengths and weaknesses of Impauldio, let's begin with the strengths, as is tradition. The elephant in the room here is quite apparent. Impauldio has a one-of-a-kind defensive gimmick in the form of the automatic gauge, and it's a very good one. Being able to get 5k every time you take a hit is quite absurd. It doesn't just deny poke swings, it also lets you guard the big attacks quite easily in a way that no other deck could. And if that wasn't enough, the offense of this deck is also quite massive, being able to build really big front row bonuses thanks to Impauldio's skill, and that's not even including the Persona Ride. You could get like 30 plus to your front row as soon as turn 4, my guy. Similarly, the offense here is well substantiated because you're getting a lot of extra drives with both the Divine skill of Impauldio and Vinstar's drive checks on rear guard circle. And those drives don't just add offensive pressure, they add stability, which is another big strength of this deck because you can dig into a lot of cards to see not just to defend yourself with, but also extra pieces to come back from a board wipe or just dig into something that you were missing on the previous turn. On a different note, Soul and Energy are very easy resources for this deck. All you're using them for are pretty nice skills like plussing or extra power bonuses, and they're not things that you can choke on. Furthermore, this deck is very open to various nation generics, and a lot of them we are actually demonstrating in this deck profile that I released, right? We're talking things like Elbard X-striker, which is a grade 3 festival collection card. We've got the new defensive festival collection order of Bustling Bleachers and the Banana Man to go along with it, and we're of course running Bobalmine, which is one of the greatest greatest and most accessible resource cards in the history of the format. But for all these great strengths, there's still a lot of weaknesses for Impauldio to talk about here. Chief among them is that it has no reliable multi-attack method. Sure, you can do the cute thing of that Gold Dog Dragon, which can call itself when discarded, so if you have a battle phase discarder, you can call it to rear guard circle for an extra attack, but this requires like two somewhat janky pieces that are only really useful for this one singular combo, and it's also a CB combo, and Counterblast is a really big choke point for this deck, which is another big weakness of this deck, because if you don't have enough damage to Counterblast for your skills, you're gonna wet noodle, my guy. And if you don't have any CB whatsoever, and you don't have any Bobalmine to give back your CB, you can't even get the front row power up, and you truly do nothing on that turn except swing, 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 pass. So yeah, Counterblast, hugely reliant on that, and you may not always have it. On another note, Automod Gauge is, while it's a very powerful gimmick as we outlined before, it's also inherently unstable because it's somewhat reliant on what your opponent chooses to do. Depending on how they swing, they may deny you damage, or if you end up getting something like the OT, you may accidentally deny yourself damage based on deck RNG. And even though you may build things with the Automod Gauge, you may not always have cards in the drop zone to Automod in the first place, which leads me to the next weakness of this deck, which is it's very susceptible to early rush. You can't really defend a lot of attacks on like grade 1 and 2 turns, and what's more issue with that is if you do get rushed, then you're going to run into a little problem where you don't have anything in the drop to Automod Gauge, because you will have to like throw away cards just to get them in the drop. You didn't have enough time to naturally progress things to the drop zone by way of discarding for Ride or Soul Blasting or what have you. So if you're just getting poked to death right off the bat, then there's a lot of damage there that you couldn't make proper use of to make your gauges ramp up. And if you're at very high damage, then you have less opportunity to take advantage of the defensive bonuses, because you just have less opportunity to take damage and not die right off the bat. So that's a really big weakness for this deck. One final issue for Impauldio is that it's hugely reliant on Vinstar. Vinstar's ability to drive check and just be a really nice beater on the board is something that this deck uses as somewhat of a crutch, because those extra drives are kind of everything. And Vinstar is something that is a very finite card. Let's be real. Not only can you just straight up not see that card, there's no inherent searchability for it aside from some of the grade 3 searching from Pansmermia and Glitch Epicenter, which does help, mind you, but it's not perfect. One requires you to see it off top 7, the other one requires you to be on Persona Ride. Vinstar binds itself after battle, which means that you won't be able to get that back because there's no way to get it from the bind zone. And if you happen to damage check it or put it in the drop zone, there's only one way to get that back, and that's from Ride Blind. So overall, Vinstar is very finite, and if you lose those early for whatever reason, then you're not going to have Vinstars there for the late game pushes, which means that the late game that this deck prides itself on is going to suffer as a result. So yeah, if you see Vinstar, be sure to try and stockpile him as much as possible, because he's going to be seeing use, trust me. Now, moseying on over to these deck stats here, let's begin with power. Power gets a 4 out of 5. This deck hits really big, and it can keep scaling in power thanks to its gauges. But the one thing that keeps it from the 5 out of 5 is that it lacks multi-attack, so PGs are a huge bummer. Plus, if you're unable to build gauges properly, the power can suffer at times. Remember, like I said, if you get early rushed and you don't physically have cards in drop zone to Automod Gauge, you're not going to have a lot of gauge by the time you start hitting to grade 3, so your power lines aren't as big as they could possibly be under normal circumstances. That said, the drive checks still add quite a bit of pressure here, albeit with some RNG because you need to see the triggers to get offensive value out of them, but you can still see triggers a lot of the time, and even if you don't see the triggers, that it's up to your opponent about whether or not they're still going to guard hard just to make sure that you don't chance it, right? So if they still guard hard, then you basically did the proper amount of pressuring that an offense would do, even without actually having the physical power present. Just the threat of the power alone is enough to dig into their hand quite a bit. Overall, it's a pretty heavy duty deck. It falls a bit short of the 5 out of 5 mark though. Defense, on the other hand, is Impauldio's specialty. A clear 5 out of 5 if ever there was one. Not only does the deck have access to, I cannot emphasize this enough, a one-of-a-kind defensive mechanic, one that make MLB blush, mind you, but it has loads of other options to stonewall the opponent. We're talking high shield value units like Nebula Invoke, blitz orders like Buster Barrage, and even the Bustling Bleachers order to have your units on the field mosey on over to the Guardian Circle. This deck was made to turtle, and by God, it shall turtle. As far as consistency goes, we see a good 3 out of 5 for Impauldio. Apart from the Vanguard and the set order, which do a lot of the heavy lifting for your strategy, the only pieces you really want to see here are Vinstar and Nebula Invoke. Thankfully, both can be fished out pretty easily thanks to the search effects of Impauldio and the new Headway Dragon, and Vinstar in particular benefits from the extra searchability from Pansmermia and Glitch Epicenter should you choose to run it. That said, it's not perfect consistency, and the deck can go without seeing some of its pieces for quite a while if you whiff your top 5 searches. Furthermore, the fundamental gimmick of the automod gauge is inherently unstable and prone to falling into certain pitfalls like not being able to get damage or even lacking cards to gauge with in the early game. All told, the deck doesn't really need much to get going, but it sometimes lacks the right pieces or number of gauges to function properly. In the recovery department, we see a respectable 3 out of 5 for the deck, thanks mainly once again to the call skills of Headway and Impauldio himself. However, as stated before, this isn't guaranteed to get you what you need, so losing pieces on board sucks big time. Another unfortunate detriment, to reiterate, is that Vinstar, the key attacker of the deck, binds himself after battle, so there's no getting that back. And even though Doras Evoria will let you get a card from the drop zone to the hand by way of the automod gauge, that's only a once per game skill effectively, so it ain't much. In other words, the only way you're coming back from a field wipe is with your hand or by hitting good off Impauldio and Headway. It's not bad by any means, of course, but it's pretty average all things considered. In the economy department, however, we see a return to form with a nice 4 out of 5. When you get right down to it, 2 out of the 3 primary resources in Standard, that being Soul and Energy, are virtually free to do with as you please. Sure, you have plenty of ways to Soul Blast with your various cards, particularly for power bonuses like Nebula, Invoke, and Elbard, and the deck is no stranger to Energy Blasting to get some nice plussing, but these are all nice additional skills that you can't really choke on in your fundamental game plan. The same cannot be said for Counterblast, however, with your Divine skill turn usually being a whopping Counterblast 3 thanks to Impauldio and Vinstar's skills, and another Counterblast 2 for every other turn thanks to those 2 units again. And unlike Soul and Energy, the things you're counterblasting for here are super integral to your strategy, granting you the scaling power of Impauldio's Axe skill based off of your gauges and those sweet drive checks from those units, which give you both the big offensive and defensive edge that the deck relies on. This alone almost made me give it a 3 out of 5 in economy, but thankfully for Impauldio, he's a Brandgate deck, and thus has access to the most easily accessible countercharger in the whole format, Bobalmine, which by the way doubles as a way to build Soul as it goes into Soul after battle. Still, given that this deck tends to take the opponent into the grind game, those counterblasts are going to catch up with you eventually, even if you do manage to see multiple Bobalmines. Ironically, the new resource card we got in Roving Probe gives you Soul and Energy, the 2 resources we weren't hurting for. So, and that's the reason why I'm not running it, by the way. So yeah, be careful with your counterblast or you'll end up a wet noodle in the late game. Now last, and in this case most certainly least, we have Control, which gets a 1 out of 5. And well, we got Spacewalk Dragon, but that's a neg 1 which only retires grade 1 or lower, so that's not very good there. There's generic units like Makani, but that's expensive and janky. I guess you could always express your inner Orphis champ and whip out the long forgotten world order in the darkness nobody knows and be absolutely different at locals. Yeah, I'm sorry fellas, but there's not really much here. Hell, it's so bad that system code X-ceed, the only grade 1 order that you reliably have in your deck, makes Skewed Pain a major pain in the ass as it's only grade 1 and you need increments of 5 grade to even start getting retires out of Skewed Pain. So yeah, I think we're all in agreement here. Impauldio's not a control deck. So those were all the stats. It's time for the final grade. I'm awarding the Destined one of Exceedance a hearty old B+. It's overall a pretty unique deck, which is arguably the most capable defense-oriented deck in the format, but it's also that kind of hard to judge deck, as it's chaotic here. I mean, just look at the blueprint, right? The janky nature of the auto mod makes its trademark defense unreliable at times, and it falls prey particularly to early rush, which is very prevalent in the standard format, mind you. Its other noteworthy feature is its ability to drive check a ton, but again, that's kind of a toss-up. On one hand, you could simply hit the nuts and blow the F up, or it's 4 blanks and you consider forfeiting on the spot. It's very much coin flip that way. Still, it's a very hard deck to put down in the field of battle, and even without multi-attack, those swings are pretty darn scary, and you only have 4 PGs to go through in most cases. So the deck has a very solid grasp on sword and shield tactics. It's not a perfect system, but Impauldio is still very very, very impressive. And Headway did a lot to bolster this deck's overall consistency and recoverability, thus rounding out the strategy as a whole. It's hard to say what's next for the deck. Even with everyone shouting for the hills that it needs an extra attack because that's what we do for every 3 attack deck we have, like Boff Sagada. But if I'm being real with y'all, the deck hits like a freaking freight train as it is with those 3 attacks. So instead of that, I'd ask for more utility with the automod gauges. I mean, we're storing so many cards in that sucker, and it'd be nice to continue getting ways to make what we choose to gauge matter. But regardless of that, the deck is in a pretty nice spot as it is, with good baseline support and room to expand on its gimmick. So whatever comes next, the Destined one of Exceedance will continue to grow more and more and more, hoping to one day surpass us all as the ultimate life form. Thank you for watching. If you like this deck profile update, then be sure to check out the other updates that I'm going to be uploading in the near future here. And also check out the other deck profiles I did for the Destined ones if you need to catch up on those in the meantime. And with that said, if you did like this, be sure to also subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for next time I do any other upload. And also check out my other Vanguard content. I have a lot of Vanguard content here. We're talking top 10s, anime reactions, tier list, fight nights, the whole shebang, so check them out. And with that said, take care. God bless.